Soldier opened in October 1998, cost $60 million to make, and grossed $14 million worldwide. Today, we're counting down 14 facts about Soldier. Stick around for number 1, because the man who wrote the script never watched the finished film, and the reason he gave for staying away is the most damning review it ever received. 14. The script was 15 years old before anyone shot it. David Webb Peoples wrote the script for Soldier in 1983. He was already working on Blade Runner at the time, rewriting Hampton Fancher's draft at Ridley Scott's request, and wrote Soldier essentially in the same creative breath, during the same period with the same thematic DNA running through both. The script then sat for 15 years. It moved through Hollywood. Without finding a director willing to commit to it, Sylvester Stallone was attached early on, with Ted Kotcheff, who had directed Stallone in First Blood, lined up to direct. That version never got made. Clint Eastwood read it, loved it, and was attached to direct for a period before he, too, walked away. By the time Paul W.S. Anderson brought it to the screen in 1998, the screenplay was a teenager. A script written in the year Return of the Jedi came out, finally reached theaters 15 years later. Hollywood didn't lose it. It just kept it waiting. 13. Clint Eastwood loved the script and walked away. Anyway, Clint Eastwood's relationship with David Webb, Peoples ran deep. Eastwood had taken another Peoples script, Unforgiven, and held it for nearly a decade before directing it in 1992, winning the Academy Award for Best Director and Best Picture in the process. The pattern repeated with Soldier. Eastwood read the script, responded to it, and attached himself to direct. Then he left. No public explanation was given. The project sat back on the shelf after his departure, which is where it remained until Paul W.S. Anderson came looking for a follow-up to Event Horizon, a man who had proven he could wait a decade for the right People's script to come together, walked away from this one. Unforgiven earned Eastwood 2 Oscars. Soldier earned its director nothing but a lesson in what happens when a production runs out of time, money, and weather on the same film. 12. Kurt Russell trained for 18 months and made no other films. Kurt Russell decided that Sergeant Todd, 3465, needed to look like a man who had been built for violence since birth, not a Hollywood actor who had spent 8 weeks in a gym. He told director Paul W.S. Anderson that he wanted 18 months to prepare his body for the role, and that he would accept no other work during that time. Anderson agreed and filled the gap by making Event Horizon. Russell trained 3 to 4 hours every day for a year and a half. He took no other jobs. He made no other films. When production was finally ready to begin, Russell arrived on set with a physical transformation that was, by multiple accounts, extraordinary. A body that looked less like an actor preparing for a role and more like a man who had never been anything other than a weapon. The production was postponed for a year and a half because one actor believed the character's physicality was non-negotiable. The finished film grossed less than a quarter of its budget. Russell's commitment outlasted the box office by a considerable distance. 11. He broke his ankle. Tripping over a decorative cabbage 1 week into principal photography, Kurt Russell broke his left ankle. The production immediately released a statement to the press explaining that Russell had sustained the injury during a stunt. This was not true. Russell had tripped over an ornamental cabbage during a break in filming. The decorative vegetable had been placed on set as part of the production design and was not under any circumstances a stunt prop. 4 days after returning to the set, Russell broke the top of his right foot. He now had 2 injuries on 2 separate feet. Having spent 18 months preparing his body for a physically demanding role, the production's response was methodical. The crew filmed every scene that could be accomplished with Russell lying down first, then the sitting scenes, then the scenes where he stood without moving. The action sequences, the ones the film's entire third act depended on, were saved for last. The very last scene filmed was the running sequence between Todd and Kane, 607, that appears near the beginning of the finished movie. 10. El Niño destroyed. The film Anderson actually wanted to make. Paul W.S. Anderson went into Soldier with a specific vision. He wanted to make a Western in space, a film that used the genre conventions of the American frontier Western and transposed them onto a science fiction setting using open landscapes and wide skies to frame Todd's isolation the way John Ford had framed his heroes against Monument Valley. Location scouts had identified outdoor shooting environments that would support that vision. Then the El Niño weather system of 1997 and 1998 arrived and destroyed them. Severe storms rendered the planned locations unusable. The production was forced to pull back entirely onto studio sound stages in closed, controlled environments that were exactly wrong for the open-air Western aesthetic Anderson had been planning for the 18 months he'd spent waiting for Russell to finish training. The film that made it to theaters was built on stage sets because the weather had taken the outdoors away. Anderson later described the compromise as one of his significant professional regrets. The Western in space he intended never got made. What got made instead earned $14 million. 9. Kurt Russell spoke 104 words in 85% of the film. Kurt Russell appears in 85% of Soldier's 99-minute running time. During that time, his character speaks exactly 104 words. That number has been verified across multiple sources and cited consistently in coverage of the film for over 2 decades. 104 words across the better part of an hour and 40 minutes, an average of approximately 1 word per minute. The decision to strip Todd's dialogue to near nothing was Russell's own, driven by the same conviction that had produced the 18 months of training, a man conditioned since birth to follow orders, to kill on command, and to suppress every human instinct. Would not explain himself. He would not chat. He would not emote in language. Russell communicated the entire interior life of a traumatized soldier through facial expression, posture, and stillness. Critics who praised anything about the film almost universally praised this. 104 words, 85% of the film, in a performance that reviewers described as quietly extraordinary. Todd said almost nothing. Russell said everything. 8. The Junk Planet was a graveyard of other films. The Waste Disposal Planet of Arcadia 234, the garbage world where Todd is dumped and left to die, is covered in wreckage from other films. The production populated the Junk Planet's surface with identifiable props and set pieces from other Warner Brothers productions, creating a private in-joke buried inside the production design. Among the debris, the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a full aircraft carrier hull, the F-117X Remora stealth aircraft from Executive Decision, the 1996 action film, a piece of the Lewis and Clark spacecraft from Event Horizon, Paul W.S. Anderson's previous film, and a spinner, the flying car used by Blade Runners in Ridley Scott's 1982 science fiction classic, the most significant Easter egg in the entire film. The garbage planet was stocked with the physical remnants of other stories, all of them obsolete, all of them discarded. A film about a man thrown away with the trash was filmed on a set made from the literal trash of other productions. The metaphor was in the production design the whole time. 7. Todd's service record is a secret history of Kurt Russell's career. The computer screen that displays Todd's military service record contains considerably more information than the film draws attention to. Every battle name, every medal, and every commendation on Todd's record is a reference to something in Kurt Russell's filmography. The battles of Tannhäuser Gate and the Shoulder of Orion connect the film to Blade Runner. Those were the locations referenced in Roy Batty's dying monologue. But the other entries go deeper. Todd is shown to have received the Pliskin Medal, a direct reference to Snake Plissken, the character Russell played in Escape from New York and Escape from L.A. Battles reference the computer wore tennis shoes, The Thing Tango and Cash, Backdraft, Captain Ron, and Stargate. Locations from Star Trek II. The Wrath of Khan are also embedded in the list. The service record of a fictional soldier is a complete filmography of the actor playing him, hidden in plain sight on a computer screen that most audience members never pause to read. 6. The writer said it was inspired by the Terminator, not Blade Runner. The Blade Runner connection that director Paul W.S. Anderson built into Soldier, the spinner in the wreckage, the battle locations from Roy Batty's monologue, the thematic overlap between replicants and engineered soldiers, was not what David Webb Peoples intended when he wrote the script. In a 2023 interview for the book Soldier, From Script to Screen, Peoples stated plainly that he never intended Soldier to be set in the Blade Runner universe. He had no thoughts about that when he wrote it. The film that inspired Soldier was The Terminator, James Cameron's 1984 thriller about a machine built for killing that cannot stop, cannot negotiate, and cannot be reasoned with. Peoples wrote Soldier as an exploration of what that premise looked like from the inside, not from the perspective of the people being hunted, but from the soldier who has been built to do the hunting. Anderson added the Blade Runner connections without the writer's input or intention. The spiritual kinship between the two films was real. The shared universe was someone else's idea. 5. The film shares its box office fate with Blade Runner. Soldier and Blade Runner share more than a screenwriter and a universe. They share a commercial history. Both films were released by Warner Brothers. Both were savaged by critics on release. Both failed spectacularly at the box office. Blade Runner had underperformed badly in 1982, and Soldier lost roughly $45 million in 1998. Both subsequently found large and devoted audiences on home video, building the kind of following that theatrical performance had entirely failed to predict. The pattern is unusual enough to qualify as a specific kind of Warner Brothers science fiction curse. Ambitious films about what it means to be human, written by the same man, rejected by the same audiences at the same studio, then quietly adopted by the same cult. Blade Runner eventually became one of the most critically reevaluated films in cinema history. Soldier has not quite managed that elevation, but the trajectory is the same. The box office is never the last word. 4. 4-foot extras made the military vehicles look bigger. The massive military vehicles used by Colonel McComb's forces in Soldier were not as large as they appear on screen. To amplify their scale, without building full-size versions that would have destroyed the budget, the production hired extras, who stood approximately 4 feet tall, and placed them in the scenes alongside the vehicles. The contrast between the smaller human figures and the machinery created the impression that the vehicles were considerably larger than they actually were. It was a practical filmmaking trick. With a long history, Ridley Scott had used similar techniques on Blade Runner and Alien, hiring people of short stature for background roles specifically to manipulate scale perception. The trick worked cleanly in Soldier. The vehicles read as enormous on screen. What the production couldn't fake was the locations they moved through. Sound stages rather than the wide-open exteriors Anderson had originally planned. The scale of the machines was right. The world around them was smaller than it should have been. 3. Kurt Russell's son played a young Todd. The sequence depicting Todd as an 11-year-old child, already being trained, already being hardened, already having the human parts of him methodically removed, was filmed with a specific casting choice that the production never publicized. The young Todd was played by Wyatt Russell, Kurt Russell's son, with Goldie Hawn. Wyatt was 10 years old at the time of filming. He would not pursue acting seriously until 2010, going on to appear in Overlord, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. His appearance in Soldier was his first screen credit, a child actor playing a child soldier cast as the younger version of his own father in a film about what happens when a man's humanity is taken from him before he ever had a chance to use it. The production never made a promotional point of the casting. Most audiences who watched the film in 1998 had no idea they were watching Kurt Russell's son become Kurt Russell. 2. The director regrets the film he was forced to make. Paul W.S. Anderson has been direct about Soldier in the years since its release. He wanted to make a Western in space. He got a studio film. The outdoor locations were destroyed by weather. The schedule was compressed by Russell's injuries. The vision he had brought to the film, the wide expanses, the frontier isolation, the physical geography of a man alone against a landscape, was replaced by sound stages that couldn't replicate what the weather had taken away. Anderson later described the making of Soldier as a film compromised at almost every stage by circumstances outside his control. The performances, particularly Russell's, survived those circumstances. The film around them didn't survive as well as it should have. What made it to theaters was a version of a film, not the film. The Western in space that Anderson and David Peoples had believed they were making exists in the script, in Russell's physical preparation, and in the cult following that. Found the film decades after the weather, the injuries, and the budget had finished with it. 1. The writer never watched the finished film. David Webb Peoples wrote the screenplay for Soldier in 1983. He waited 15 years for it to be made. When it was finally released in 1998, he did not watch it. In interviews conducted years after the film's release, Peoples confirmed that he had never seen the finished version of Soldier. He was aware of its existence. He knew it had been made. He simply chose not to watch it. His stated reason was both simple and devastating. He already knew what was supposed to be there. A writer who had spent 15 years with a script, who had imagined every scene, who had lived inside the story longer than any actor or director, decided that whatever had made it to the screen was not what he needed to see. He had the version in his head that was enough. Or maybe it was too much. The man who wrote the film gave it the only review that mattered to him. He didn't show up. Alternate ending. The finished version of Soldier ends with Todd piloting the colonist ship away from the exploding surface of Arcadia, 234 Nathan at his side pointing toward the Trinity moons, a destination, a future, and a quiet suggestion that a man built entirely for war has found something worth living for instead. It is the most optimistic ending David Webb Peoples' script allows. An earlier version of the ending went further into the film's Western roots. Todd was written to remain behind on the planet while the colonists escaped, choosing the role of the lone protector rather than joining the community he had saved. In that version, the film ends with Todd alone on the surface, having given the colonists their escape at the cost of any future of his own. The image was deliberately drawn from the Western tradition of the gunfighter who clears the town of danger and then cannot be part of the peace that follows. The studio pushed for the more hopeful conclusion, Todd on the ship, Nathan reaching for him, the stars ahead. Peoples had written a man who understood that people like Todd don't get to stay. The version that opened in theaters disagreed. Whether it was right to disagree is the question the Western ending leaves permanently open. A film built on 18 months of preparation, destroyed by weather, injuries, and a decorative cabbage, and quietly rescued by the audiences who found it after the box office was done with it. Which fact hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that deserved more than they got. Until next time.